like when you were a kid?
Well, um, the various kinds of technology were very different. I first think about television. When I was a kid, there were only three channels that you could get, and we got them over these giant wire antennas that every house had on top. And most of the time, the programming was pretty much the same on each of the channels. There was a fourth channel you could get called UHF, and those were usually the weirder channels. I remember I used to spend my Saturdays watching a show called Dr. Creep, and it was this sort of big fat guy who painted his face white and wore a top hat and played scary movies. Uh, when I was a little kid, about your age, we got cable, which brought us 31 channels, including MTV, which changed everybody my age because we started to get used to seeing music with accompanying videos, and it really affected the way we dressed and the way we talked and acted. Uh, Video games were very different. The first video game I got was called Tank, and it was an Atari game. I had an Atari 2600 system, and they came in these little cartridges, were about the size of cigarette packs, and you would put them in the video game console and play them. And Tank had two squares, and you would shoot at the other square, like Aunt Lisa and I would shoot at each other's tanks, and we thought they were the coolest things ever. Poppy got obsessed.
Kind of like a superhero battle.
No, just two tanks. I wish it were a superhero battle. That would be awesome. But it was just two blocks shooting little balls at each other, and we thought it was great. The graphics and the design of the video games got much better very quickly, and I finally bought a Nintendo 64. No, excuse me, an NES, which was the last video game console I ever bought, and the graphics on that were much better. We liked to play Mike Tyson's Punch-Out!, Castlevania, and another game called, what was that? Road Racer was the name of the other game that I liked. Your Poppy got so obsessed with Road Racer that he broke the joystick, or the controller. It was not a joystick at that time. You've seen a joystick before?
Yeah.
Okay. The NES had these sort of little pads that you would press on. They're very much like what you have now, except the ones that we have now are better ergonomically designed and they don't hurt your hands. But Poppy actually started getting hand cramps, and he played it so much he broke the paddle, or the controller pad. No one had computers in their homes. Computers were very expensive, and they were really crappy. It's not that they were unreliable, it's that oftentimes they had no memory, or they had very small bits of memory. One of the first computers I ever saw was a Commodore 64, and it had 64K memory. That means that you would use, that it only had 64K of RAM, which meant that it was extremely slow, extremely weak, and most of the games we could play and programs we could use on it were text only. They only had writing. They didn't have any graphics at all. And you had to plug it into your television. And a lot of us still had black and white televisions at the time, and really low resolution, so it was terrible. The first computer that Poppy and Grant ever bought me, I actually look back at that as one of the most important things that happened to me in my childhood, because they bought me...
Even though you got you a Mir.
I didn't get my Mir, my electric guitar. Never did. But they bought me a computer which was, at the time, was super expensive. In fact, the computer that they bought me was twice as expensive as the Macintosh PowerBook that I have now that I complain about the price. The computer that they bought me was twice as expensive, and it had a printer. Oh, how cool is that? I could print out stuff. I could print out banners and little pictures. And I thought I was the coolest guy I was the coolest guy in the neighborhood.
No.
But that computer was very expensive and very weak, although it did have floppy disks. And it did have a little bit of ROM, internal memory, where it stored programs sort of in lieu of a hard drive. It didn't have a hard drive. The original discs that we used, and we don't use discs now, we use thumb drives for the most part, and we really don't need to because a lot of times we save things in the cloud on Google or Evernote or something, or on Google Drive. The first floppy disk that I ever used was an 8-inch floppy disk with a soft case. So it was about that big. And it was, I think it was either 16K or 32K of memory, or of storage, of programs or files or whatever. So this computer that my parents bought me had a 3.5-inch hard case disk, which was very cool at the time. I was the coolest kid in the neighborhood with the computer. And because of getting a computer at that age, I learned to use a mouse quickly. I learned basic programming. I learned to type quickly because the games that I used, or the games that I played, they were 3D role-playing games, and you couldn't use a joystick or anything, so you had to type in what you wanted the character to do. So if there was a dragon flying into the screen and it was going to eat your character, you'd have to say, fight the dragon, enter, and then you'd fight the dragon. So if I didn't want my character to be eaten, I had to learn to type. So I learned to type really quickly, and it never forgotten. I mean, I was really ahead of the game compared to a lot of my peers. It was just a really good experience. Now, as far as being online, I was online very early, in the 1980s even, and we used to dial up over the phone line to something called bulletin boards, which were like little private internets, and we would exchange files and talk and be friends. Not even like a blog. It was a network that was hosted on somebody's computer at their house, and it was connected to the phone line, and you would log on and see all your friends, but it was very small. It wasn't connected to everybody wasn't connected like it is now. I didn't know my computer had a modem originally. You don't even know what a modem is. It's the big black thing in the cabinet in there. And modem stands for modulator demulator, which is a device that allows you to use the analog telephone line. Do you see that jack in there that we don't use? We don't have a phone on. It allows you to use that phone line to let your computer talk to another computer. And it makes this horrible noise when it connects. It goes... But I didn't even know the computer that I had was returned. And we didn't know it was a returned item. And whoever had bought it before me installed a modem and forgot to take it out. And I was so excited because it had a 2400 baud modem in it, which is the measure of speed of the modem. And this allowed me to get on the bulletin boards and talk to people. So you have to think of bulletin boards as kind of little baby internets that eventually all got connected. And so I was online in the 1980s, which was very early. During the 1990s, something pretty significant happened. And I think his name was Marc Andreessen. He invented something called the web browser. And the World Wide Web had been around since the internet had been around since the 1960s. And it was invented by the U.S. government as a way to communicate without having to use surface above-ground technology in the case of nuclear war. And it was hosted at colleges and through military institutions. In the early 80s, I think, an agency called the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency in the Pentagon decided it didn't need the internet anymore, and it gave it to the colleges, and it gave it to a couple private entities like WC3 and ICANN, the Internet Consortium for basically, I don't remember what the acronym stands for, but it's where the people who govern how you can name your websites or your domains. And a guy named Marc Andreessen, and the internet was only text. Excuse me, I need to go back. The internet was only text at that time. And so it was just like the bulletin boards, except it was huge, right? Anybody could get on it, and you could search and find things and communicate with people and send them email and stuff. But it wasn't very useful. And then a guy named Marc Andreessen created something called a web browser, which allowed you to see pictures and video on the web. And that blew everything up. That happened when Mommy and I were in college. And it changed everything because people suddenly wanted to read things online because it was pretty to look at. And you could see pictures, and you could see graphics, and you could see movies and stuff. Although it would take a very powerful computer and a very wide bandwidth line to watch a movie back then online. Um, the original search engine that we all used was not Google; it was called Yahoo. Yahoo! And Yahoo was so small that you could actually contact them and suggest that they link to your page. You could email them and have them do it. It wasn't like it automatically went out and found your page like Google does. And so if you had a blog, which essentially is a private little pamphlet that is published by a person on the web, often
I
about
know
their...
what a blog is.
Yeah, I know, but somebody who's watching the interview may not know. If they're old, like Great Grand, they wouldn't know. Well, your teacher will know. Okay. So, where was I? About blogs?
Yes.
But, Yahoo. Was, it was so small you could contact them and have them link to your page. And Yahoo wasn't organized like you could search it. It was organized in layers. So it was organized by subject in layers. So if you were interested in pandas, you would click animals, or you would click nature, animals, pandas, panda information, and then there would be 50 or 60 websites about pandas, and you could go through and click them and find out which one you wanted. It's not at all like it is today. We used email in college. I even used email my first semester of college, which was in the early 1990s. It was very rudimentary. It was very spare and very basic and very primitive. By the time Mommy and I were in college, we were relying on email for lots of stuff. We were communicating with people by email. Like my friend Scott, who was in Kentucky in college, we would communicate with him and his wife pretty regularly by email. About the time Mommy and I were juniors in college, maybe, there came something called America Online, which very quickly became one of the biggest companies in America. And now you've never heard of it because it collapsed because nobody wanted to use it anymore. But it was essentially like a bulletin board system, but it tied the internet together that way. So you would log on, and it would be a community that you could go and, get recipes and talk to people and find out gossip about celebrities and stuff like that. But it would also let you go out to the World Wide Web, and it used that browser, which was called Netscape, that was invented by Mark Andreessen. And people got on America Online like crazy. They loved it. But most people only used it to get to the web. And so all of the stuff America Online spent its money and its effort putting out, the content that they created, was pretty useless. But eventually that company bought one of the biggest media companies in the world, Time Warner. And that's that. I mean, that was a big significant moment where we realized that the internet was big enough that it was buying movie studios. The people who owned Bugs Bunny and Casablanca. Am I going on too long? Or is this okay?
It's 13 minutes.
Well, that's okay. It can be 15. It can be 20. We're talking. We're having a nice conversation, or I'm having a nice monologue, I guess. Now, so the America Online, people started to go away from it completely when it happened that you could just get on the web without logging onto America Online. And at the same time, there started to be better speeds and more bandwidth on the networks. And so people started to be able to download things and trade files like Napster.
Why? That sounds like something you'd listen to while trying to sleep.
I know, but it does, doesn't it? But it was the nickname of a guy named Sean Fanning, who was, when he was in college, he liked to sleep a lot, and his friends called him the Napster. And he invented a program that allowed people to exchange music files called MP3s over the web.
MP3 players.
Yeah, like the iPod. Before the Apple iPod, we had to have these things called Walkmans or Discmans, which were these sort of giant CD players that we'd carry on our belts and groove out, and it was very ugly, but we thought we were cool people. The record companies at that time treated people like veal. They would release an album from a popular artist, and they'd put 2, maybe 3 good songs on the album, and out of 15 songs, and then they would charge you $20 a piece for the album. And this is, 25 years ago. People were really mad at the record companies. Also, they were putting out really crappy music by really crappy artists. And people were mad about that. And when they realized they could start trading songs on the internet, people would pull the music off their CDs and then post the CDs or the music from the CDs to Napster. And then you could go to Napster and download all the music you wanted for free. Now, it's, I think, technically stealing, but I'd be hard-pressed to describe what the record companies have been doing for 25 years before that as anything other than stealing, too. So the consumers got their revenge on the record companies with Napster, and it's fundamentally changed the way that we consume music and all other kinds of media. About that time, I got my first iPod. It was amazing because it was so well designed. It did everything that I wanted it to do. Wherever my thumb went was exactly where it needed to be. It made wonderful clicking sound every time it would move from song to song or playlist to playlist. It would go tick, 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 tick. It was wonderful. That caused me to download lots and lots and lots of music. I don't know that I have bought a compact disc maybe in 15 or 20 years. And it's mostly because of that. Now, of course, we subscribe to Spotify as a family now, so it's all legit and above board. But I think I either downloaded or burned or ripped off the CDs about 20,000 songs. I know. And imagine that's like about 1,800 CDs worth of music. I know. A little later than that, there were these guys. One of them is named Sergey Brin, and Sergey Brin, and I forget the other guy's name. They invented something called Google, and Google is interesting because it uses artificial intelligence or an algorithm to go out and search the web for what's out there.
Kind of like Siri.
Yeah, exactly. And then it indexes the websites, and it indexes all the web content automatically, so people don't have to go and do it like we used to with Yahoo. You don't have to tell them you want to be listed, and then they add you. And Google very quickly overtook Yahoo, and nobody really pays attention to Yahoo anymore. It's sort of like a ghost town.
It's kind of like where you go when you want to figure out if a spider bite's poisonous.
Exactly, and Google has even become a verb. We say, "Oh, well, I'll Google that." But that was around the year 2000 that Google became powerful, and people started to use it a lot. And Google keeps driving technology and changing things. We use it for a lot of stuff. We rely upon it. For
like
one thing,
Google and Apple?
Google and Apple, yeah. Apple, after I got my iPod, I wanted to buy a Mac immediately because the computers that we had been using at the time were Windows-based machines like your laptop. And what do you think about your laptop?
I hate it.
Why?
Because it updates without letting me know. Like, I'll get kicked off a movie and saying, "Do not shut down your computer. Updating now." And then it updates it and I don't ever use the update.
Right. And it shuts off, and it restarts on its own. Stuff crashes all the time. All the computers were like that. They were terrible.
Super slow.
It's super slow. And Windows and Microsoft they treated us like the record companies did. They treated us like we were captive consumers and there's nothing we could do. And Apple at the time was very small. Sometimes people worried it was going to go out of business. And when I realized the iPod was so well designed, I went and bought a Macintosh immediately, and I've never, ever regretted it. And I've had Macs ever since then. Oh, by the way, you mentioned getting kicked off. At the early days of the internet, we shared, the bulletin boards. We used the same phone line as the regular phone. And if somebody called while you were online, it would kick you off and take the call. Furious. It made us furious. It was crazy. And sometimes people would unplug the phones so you couldn't get a phone call while you were. So if you had a friend and you were trying to call him and the phone was busy for 5 hours, you knew he was on the internet or he was on the bulletin board. It was very frustrating. And also, concomitant to that, it was difficult to get on America Online for a while. And that caused people to hate that too. But back to the computers being terrible at the time. Apple really became powerful, number one, because they paid attention to how people use computers. They made them elegant and sort of fun to look at and nice to be in the environment. And they're very reliable. I sometimes don't shut my computer off for 2 weeks or restart it because I don't have to. Whereas with your Windows machine, your laptop, it has to be restarted sometimes 3 or 4 times a day. Terrible.
Sucky.
So that's changed significantly. Also, the iPhone. Nobody had mobile phones. The first kind of cell phone that I ever used looked like
a banana.
It looked like exactly like a banana, square.
I've seen it in
It-
your friends' episodes. They were
Right.
like ones,
Exactly, and they were very
kind of like
expensive.
your glasses, but bad.
exactly, and they were very expensive. A lot of people didn't have them unless they were in business. I think the first phone that I got mommy for her birthday was maybe the size of one of your shoes.
What?
I know. It was just, and it unfolded. You'd have to do
A
that.
flip phone.
It was,
A big,
but it was
chunky flip
enormous
phone.
and weighed like 2 pounds. Then, and cell phones got better and smaller and easier to use. But then when Apple released the iPhone and it combined the telephone and the iPod and a small computer, that changed everything. And so now we have smartphones and mobile phones. Did you know, speaking of the connection between Google and Apple, did you know that for telephones, for information, when we wanted to call somebody on the telephone, we would use something called a phone book. Have you ever seen one?
Yes.
What's a phone book?
It's full of phone numbers. You used to make me look in there for 10 minutes.
Oh, that's right. That's for the Chinese restaurant. They were that thick, and sometimes I read them for fun. I would look at the ads in them. They were so big and thick.
Do you think kids used to sit on them?
Oh, they did. Like if you were sitting at the kitchen table and you were too big for a high chair but too small for a regular chair, they put you on a phone book. I know, or use them as a doorstop or whatever. So to sum up, Hannah, technology. Well, let me sum up by saying, not sum up. Let me conclude with this. Most of the work that I do now is online. I have friends, and I've never heard their voices. I've never met them in person. I only know them through email or online on Twitter or Facebook. Facebook and Twitter have brought people together in a way that they would have never been before, and it's sometimes not a good thing.
With the 6,000 hello texts.
Yeah, well, and I remember that I have done things and said things in my life thinking, oh, well, why not? I'll never see these people again. Then 10 years later, we're Facebook friends, and I'm like, oh, I'm really sorry at your party that I drank too much and, put the lampshade on my head or whatever. So that's been a little weird, but it has brought a lot of people together over vast distances. I have friends all over the world. I communicate with people instantaneously all over the place. I do most of my work. I make most of my living online. The writing that I do is almost always created on the computer and then distributed or sent to editors and publishers online. I grade papers online. I communicate with my students via email. I also, as a lawyer, my bankruptcy practice is entirely virtual. I'm not allowed to file paper with the court. They require me to file my papers electronically using PDFs. Isn't that amazing?
So that no one can copy your things.
Well, it sure helps with security, that's for sure. But
what about hackers?
Well, the systems that we use with the federal court are very secure, and they're not hacked very often, although I'm sure people try. I don't know that they've been hacked since I've been using the system, and it's been 10 years now that I've had an account with Pacer and it's called the ECF system. That's right. It's called the ECF system for the bankruptcy courts. But I'll get fined if I try to file paper. Now, regular people can file paper, but if attorneys try to file physical paper with the court, they get fined. That's amazing that I would be able to practice law in my jammies in the basement.
Like you did.
Right. In 15 years ago or 20 years ago, I would have had to get a suit on, go to my office, sit there, do my stuff, and then come home. It's changed the world in many ways for the better. So to sum up, I'm a member of a generation that remembers a world without computers and without an overarching, humongous network that connected us all. And the world was smaller then, and it was quieter, and
the parents kicked you out of the house.
Right, we played outside a lot more. Kids weren't as fat. Kids were healthier.
That's not true.
We had longer attention spans.
Still not true.
Yes, it's true. It is true.
You have no attention span.
What are you talking about?
Yes, the video is over.
No, it's not over yet. I want to sum up and conclude so the video has a sort of a natural ending.
Do it.
Oh, you're done? You're just done?
Dad, I've been sitting here for 25 minutes.
Okay, well, let me finish. The world has completely changed since I was a little kid, and the world that I grew up in no longer exists, and you won't even understand it, even though I've described it to you. I do think that the world now
That's
is
a 7,000-foot phone.
right, and the giant antennas that connected everything. I do think that the world now is better on balance because of all the technology. There are some drawbacks, but in terms of how to describe the change, I would describe it as historical. I would describe it as an upheaval, and I would describe it as a disruption almost of biblical proportions. This is a different planet than the one I was born into. Do you have any other questions?
Can you go clean your glasses?
Yes, I could. Any other questions?
No.
All right. Well, I'm glad I could help.
Goodbye.